So, time for the press preview then. A first look at what is on Friday's front pages. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and former government special advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Evening to you both. Let's start with a look at those front pages then. According to The Telegraph, discussions are underway between ministers to allow people to cut the wait for a COVID booster vaccination from 6 months after their second jab to just 5. The Daily Mail says 9 million people could get a third dose of a coronavirus vaccine earlier than originally planned. In response to the new Vaccines Minister, Maggie Throup, having made no national media appearances since her appointment, the Eye declares her missing. Meanwhile, The Guardian reports that GPs in England have threatened industrial action as the row over face-to-face appointments deepens. Let's slide in your Metro. A court has heard that the man accused of murdering Sir David Amess had plotted for 2 years to try to kill an MP. That's on their front page. Also the lead story in tomorrow's Times. And the FT carries a prediction from the Bank of England's new chief economist that inflation is likely to reach close to or even slightly above 5% next year. And I'm joined tonight by Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Good to see you both. So, Salma, let's kick off, shall we, with the front of the Daily Mail. It's also covered in the Daily Telegraph, their front page as well. 9 million people set to get booster jab early, because at the moment you have to wait 6 months after your second jab. But what the Prime Minister is hoping that might be brought forward to just 5 months.
Yes, and I think a part of this is because the whole of government is now very worried about what's going to happen to the NHS in winter crisis. So not only do you have the lingering effects of COVID and, the fact that efficacy is waning after 2 jabs, as we've heard from lots of people, that you've got the new threat of flu and the fact that people are not as immune and won't sort of wear these illnesses as easily as they may have done if we were all still moving about, and the fact that you still have a backlog. So you have this absolute triple threat for the NHS. And what this suggests is that the government is very, very serious about trying to minimise that risk, minimise the pressure on the NHS, and so are desperately trying to make sure that those boosters are getting into arms, which I think has been a bit difficult for them when you think about the take-up this time around for the booster.
Yes, Steve, the government's strategy very much will keep things as we are. We're just going to really try and accelerate that booster programme. And it's interesting, on the front of the Telegraph, they go into a bit of detail here. If the booster jab wait could be cut, it would mean most over 65s could be vaccinated by early November rather than early December, and all over 70s in the coming days and weeks rather than by mid-November. And it could actually have quite a big impact, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the worry is that this is the sole kind of instrument to deal with the rising infections, the vaccination. We have the laxest range of constraints, I think I read the other day, in the Western world here in the UK. So obviously the focus on the vaccine is huge. And unsurprisingly, therefore, I mean, a wider range of measures might mean the total dependence on the vaccine was not quite so great. But as it is, it makes absolute sense and will make a difference. And the more and speedily people can get it, the better. But it is a curious thing about this Prime Minister. He is famously flexible on so many issues, 1 minute a Keynesian, the next a Thatcherite, and so on. But on this, his libertarian instincts prevail every time. And we're in this familiar pattern of people working within the NHS warning that it's reaching another sort of crisis point.
But of course, Steve, it's not clear-cut, is it? We're in a situation where Wales has the highest number of cases, but also the strictest measures. They've been wearing masks for ages. And also Scotland has the lowest number of cases, but also has masks indoors and vaccination passports. It's not an easy one to work out, is it? Just very briefly, Steve.
No, but no one's being asked to be sort of hopelessly constrained. We're not talking about a lockdown here. We're talking about relatively manageable measures that might, I don't know, but it might make a difference, as well as this dependency, which is great, on the vaccine.
Yeah, let's bring in the front of the Times, Salma. Some good news for once. Booster dose of Pfizer vaccine offers near total protection. So if you do get that third jab, certainly if it's Pfizer, then you're doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, this is really quite incredible. And it's, again, another testament to the amazing pharmaceutical companies. I mean, who knew anybody would be saying that about pharmaceutical companies? But their work and their research and what is being produced. So I think, hats off to Pfizer. But what I do think is interesting about this is that there is an element of this story that suggests that actually the government is trying to entice people into getting those boosters. So I go back to the point that I made earlier, is that there are not enough shots in arms. And I think this is going to be the critical problem, the critical structural problem that the government is facing. So having that bit of good news, I think, might sort of encourage people who maybe don't have, the text message system from the GP or whatever it might be. And with the infrastructure of the vaccination programme having been wound down, might encourage them then to go and seek that vaccination.
Yeah, and you mentioned GPs there, so we're going to skip on to the front of The Guardian, Steve, because GPs are threatening industrial action in a row with Minister, is their headline. This is all about face-to-face appointments, but of course it's the worst possible time, isn't it, for GPs to be threatening strike action when we're trying to get those jabs into arms?
It would be a nightmare to have them on strike now, and it's a really interesting conundrum. And it poses a fundamental question: how much power should patients have? Because basically, from my understanding, the dispute is over whether the patients have the right to insist on a face-to-face appointment, or whether the GPs have the right to decide whether to meet people face-to-face. And this whole issue of how you empower patients, the degree to which they should be empowered, the degree to which often under-resourced or overstretched GPs must make judgments, is at the heart of this particular conundrum. The threat to strike is a sort of potent weapon in itself. But let's hope this issue can be resolved without it.
Yeah, Salma, just a very brief word on this from you, if you could.
It feels like there's been a bit of a misunderstanding in terms of communication, because the government said that they want to give money to GPs to make access a lot easier. So I hope it is resolved and swiftly, because I don't see that there are going to be any winners if there's strike action.
OK, thank you both for the moment. Stay where you are, because coming up, Donald Trump's new social media platform claims it will offer truth. But will it? We'll discover that next. Welcome back. Part two of the press preview. Steve and Salma still with me. Steve, front page of the Financial Times. They've got the first interview with Hugh Pill in his new role. He's a Bank of England economist, and he's rather gloomy, saying that inflation heading to 5% or potentially more.
There's a lot to be gloomy about, but whether, and the consequence of this, the FT says in its splash, or reporting him, is a possible interest rate rise. And this is not a scientific exercise. I mean, it's been removed from government, of course, until 1997. Governments took that decision. Now it's being made by the Bank of England. But I've heard former members of the Monetary Policy Committee saying this would be absolutely the wrong time to do it, with all the other pressures on consumers to hit borrowers with a big, well, who knows what the size of it would be, but with an interest rate rise. So I think it's a difficult decision. That part of their remit is to act in ways that bring inflation down when it goes above certain levels. But this economy is so fragile at the moment, with so many things going on, price rises in all kinds of sectors. It's not by any means a straightforward decision, but a number of interviews emerging from the Bank of England suggest they're inclined to take it.
Yeah, Salma, it's certainly unprecedented times, and it's understandable why people are jittery.
Yeah, of course, because it means some serious, as Steve rightly pointed out, some serious consequences from the Bank of England in terms of what happens to those people who probably already feel that they're struggling at the moment, whether it be with cost of living in terms of day-to-day or mortgages or whatever the interest rates will affect, which is essentially everything. But what I think is interesting is that we have gotten so used to what effectively people have called cheap money for such a long time that the impact of this will be incredibly significant on the economy. So the Bank of England is going to have to be incredibly cautious about how it stages itself out of this current low interest period. And I also think that the Treasury probably needs to start accepting that they have to move away from this line that they've continued with, which is inflation rises and inflation risk rise is temporary, because it doesn't look like it is.
OK. And let's finish with a story about Donald Trump, Steve. It's in the Metro. Donald Trump says, "We live in a world where the Taliban has a huge presence on Twitter, yet your favourite American president has been silenced. This is unacceptable." So he's setting up his own social media app.
Well, I think us two were on the night it emerged that Twitter had banned the then incumbent of the White House from tweeting any longer. And I'm no fan of him or his tweets, but I thought it was wrong that an elected figure should be silenced by non-elected people. So, well, he's not elected now, although he kind of thinks he still is, because he thinks he was robbed of it in his kind of fantasy world. But if he wants to tweet on some alternative platform, let him. He was an elected figure, and the way to challenge him is not to silence him, but to expose his tweets for what they are.
Yeah, Salma, will you be reading his messages?
I won't, but I do think it's marvellous that it's called truth, because obviously the concept is so subjective, as Donald Trump himself has proven.
No fake news there, only the truth. All right, Steve and Salma, thank you very much indeed.